When the first trailer for the new Monster Hunter movie came out, my exact reaction was essentially, well, that's a interesting direction for them to take this movie, but hey, in the very least, it gives me an excuse to do some Monster Hunter art on PopCross Studios. And I've talked before about how I'm a huge fan of Monster Hunter designs. It's not even really my kind of game series, but I love the designs in it so much. Both the creatures and the armors, which I specifically wanted to do some armors for this episode. And from there I got an idea that was actually also partially spurred from one of my really old videos back when I thought PopCross Studios was going to be an animation channel, where I was talking about some of my favorite fandoms growing up. They were pretty much all animes revolving around monsters and creatures: Pokemon, Digimon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! So I thought it would be cool to take some of the most popular creatures from each of those shows and redesign them into Monster Hunter armors, as if someone from Monster Hunter had slayed those beasts and converted their hides into suits of armor. I've been sitting on this idea for ages and I'm super excited to finally be doing it. I only have time to do 3 designs for this episode because I'm kind of rushing stuff a little bit so I can bank some episodes and actually take a week off for Christmas. So I would love to do another episode of this, but that's much more likely to happen if lots of people hit the like button to get the YouTube algorithm to push this video out to more people. And if new people subscribe because they like the idea of another episode of this. But anyway, this is going to be a blast. I'm super excited to get into it, so let's go! First up, had to go with Blue Eyes White Dragon from Yu-Gi-Oh! And Blue Eyes is probably the most famous creature from that series. I mean, there are some other ones that I like a little bit more than Blue Eyes, but it's hard to ignore that Blue Eyes is just an awesome, cool-looking dragon. And for this initial Monster Hunter armor design, what I wanted to try and do was make it sort of a little bit like a traditional knight in shining armor kind of look, but obviously with more of a Monster Hunter aesthetic and with elements of Blue Eyes. And that's because Blue Eyes is a very armor-plated looking dragon. I mean, it depends on the rendering in the show. Sometimes it looked a little bit more fleshy from what I remember, but at least on the card, and which is the most famous image of Blue Eyes, it looks like it's just totally armor-plated. I was also heavily referencing that book that I showed earlier in the video that just has tons of different Monster Hunter armors in it. And there was so much cool stuff to take inspiration from, and lots of different types of armors that have different levels of armored plating, and some are a little bit more leathery, some completely cover a character's body, some leave lots of areas open. With this one, I wanted to make it almost totally covered. The one spot that I left uncovered was the shoulder of the arm that's holding the big weapon, and my reasoning behind that was if that's the arm that they're mostly swinging this weapon with, they don't want anything hindering the movement of that arm. And I mean, I gave them this giant buster sword that I imagined being made out of the wing of Blue Eyes that realistically, they probably need 2 arms to swing it around, but still, I wanted to leave that one arm free to have a little bit more movement to it. I also decided to have some parts of the body coated in like a bit of a leathery kind of padding, as if the armor wasn't meant to cover the entire body, or maybe once they killed the creature, they didn't even have enough armor to totally finish the rest of it. But really, the main reason that I wanted to have that was to have a little bit of color variety, because Blue Eyes is just, I mean, I was going to say blue. I guess technically he's Blue Eyes White Dragon, but let's face it, in the renderings of him, he's pretty much always blue looking, which is probably a factor of the lighting, but whatever. I was coloring this thing in a light blue color for the most part, and I needed to vary that up a little bit, so I added the brown leathery kinds of bits. It's a nice complementary color to the blue, and then with a few black streaks of leather in there as well, I thought that was going to really flesh out the design a little bit more. And once I throw a background in behind this one, I love how it looks. The rendering, I was also trying to make it look a little bit shinier and glossier, because if you look at the image of Blue Eyes, it's a pretty shiny, glossy looking dragon, so I wanted to make sure I translated that over. Overall, I was thrilled with how this first one came together. Was a little bit nervous because, as I've talked about before, I'm not spectacular with medieval kinds of armor designs, but yeah, super happy with this one. Hope y'all dig it as well. Now, Greymon was one of the designs that I was most excited to work with in this episode because, honestly, I'm surprised I haven't done a Digimon episode on this channel before. I started doing one once. I was doing a Digimon as Superheroes episode, but it wasn't coming together well. I ended up scrapping it and doing something else. I still want to do something Digimon related, and having at least one drawing in this episode was, a good start. And I also knew it was going to be fun to do a very contrasting armor to the Blue Eyes armor, because with the Blue Eyes armor, as I was saying, that's a very armor-plated looking dragon, whereas Greymon, he's got his outside skull armor kind of thing, but the rest of him is kind of just leathery dinosaur texture with a bit of tiger striping to him, which I just think is such a cool, simple design. And I figured I could convert the hide of Greymon into a sort of leathery armor, and one of those armors that's a little bit more sparse, doesn't totally cover the person's body. And I was leaning into this sort of savage warrior kind of design, where there's more leather straps, I even have some bones sticking out of it, and it just looks a bit scrappier, which is really some of my favorite kind of stuff to design when doing character work. And I mean, that makes it look a little bit less like armor, I guess, but I was referencing Monster Hunter armors to make this design, and I think it still does a decent enough job of meshing in with other designs from that world. By the end of the inking stage on this one, it's not as detailed looking as some of the other stuff in this video, because I end up adding in the colors, the blue streaks on the character in the coloring stage. And I have noticed more and more that I really like when I do that, when I add some color to a character that's not blocked out by my inks. I might start leaning into that a little bit more in some of my future drawings, but I don't know, we'll see. I'm always experimenting a bit with the stuff I'm doing on this channel. Another part of this one that I was really happy with was the face of the character. I gave her a bit of a snarkier look because I was seeing this character as a bit more of a punky kind of warrior, and I really like that. I feel like it gives the character a bit more, well, character. I was also taking a little bit more inspiration from anime face rendering for female characters. As I mentioned a few videos ago, I'm working on how I draw female characters' faces, and it's coming along really nicely. I'm finding a sort of formula that I like for eyes, still messing around with mouths and noses, but overall, a bunch of the female characters I've been drawing lately I've liked more than a bunch of my older ones. I definitely think the helmet on this one ends up looking very low-key, but, you know, I mean, Greymon's got those horns that do kind of look a bit low-key if you throw them on a human character's head. Also, there's definitely a lot of size disproportion between her weapon being made out of his front horn and her helmet having his side horns, because those should all be closer sized. But you could say, I guess, he was a giant creature and they whittled down part of his skull to make that helmet, I guess. Anyway, this is probably my favorite from the video, and I hope you all dig it as much as I do. So, I filmed the intro and outro for this video first, and when I started editing them, I noticed that in the middle of my forehead there was some weird fuzzy thing. Normally I would refilm it to get rid of that, but as I said, I'm rushing through some stuff, been working like crazy the last 2 weeks so I can take a break for Christmas and still put out videos, so I don't really feel like refilming it. And maybe if I hadn't even said anything, most people wouldn't have noticed, but, you know, I had nothing to talk about in the middle of this video like I normally do, so that's how we got here. Anyway, leave your comments away about the weird thing in the middle of my forehead, because, you know, comments help with algorithm stuff too. This was a dumb interruption, wasn't it? Let's get back into the next drawing, shall we? Now for Charizard, which is one that I knew from the start I was definitely going to end up doing in this video, but I didn't have as good of an idea going in. And you can probably kind of tell that by the fact that I'm doing a bunch more rough drawings for the pose on this one. For the other two, I'd known what poses I wanted to go with. I mean, I'm not doing anything super dynamic with the poses in this one because I want to really show off the armors that I'm designing. I don't want to be concealing anything behind limbs and stuff, but I still, for this one, was a little bit unclear going into it. One thing I knew I wanted to do was have him dual wielding some weapons, like two smaller but still pretty big swords, because I saw some really awesome Monster Hunter swords that people would dual wield. And that itself also isn't super inspired by anything on Charizard. I guess you could kind of say because he's got two wings, but then again, you know, Blue Eyes had two wings and I only gave the character one sword. Don't get me wrong, I do end up liking how this one comes together, I just don't think the idea was as well fleshed out. I guess I was kind of having to flesh it out a bit more as I was going, improvising it a bit more. One thing that I do like about it is the leatherier parts of the character, the more fabric-looking parts underneath the armor, are done in, well, when we get to the coloring stage, will be done in the bluish teal sort of color of Charizard's wing, as if that part of Charizard is a little bit more fleshy, more leathery, and could be more easily converted into that sort of under armor material. It also doesn't totally make sense what I do with the outer armor though. I color it all in Charizard's traditional orange sort of color, but as you can see from looking at Charizard, he's the least armored of the three characters that I'm pulling inspiration from for this video, and yet I made this a very armored design. The way that I was kind of justifying that in my head was as if someone took the hide from Charizard and laid it over some other kind of armor. And a reason for doing that could be something like Charizard being a fire-breathing creature and having a tail that's constantly on fire would be fireproof himself. So if you take that fireproof hide and put it on an armor, suddenly you've got fireproof armor. So, you know, the reasoning and the logic is there, it just, I don't think it's as obvious or makes as much sense as some of the other designs in this video. Really, doing this design just made me want to do another round of armors like this, maybe pulling a little bit more from Digimon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Specifically, just because the Awesome Art channel subjectively has a bunch of really incredible videos done by Jack Burke, who does some awesome Pokemon armor designs. If you haven't checked those out, you gotta go look at them, they're super cool. I'll link one in the cards or wherever, but I definitely think there's a lot more to explore in these designs, and I had so much fun doing them, and I do really like how all three turn out, even if I do, as I've said many times now, think this one was a little bit less well thought out than the others. Anyway, still a cool drawing, I think, so let's take a look at how it looks all finished up with a little background thrown in. Here it is. Special announcement before I wrap up this video, and that's that next week's Monday video, instead of coming out Monday, is going to come out Sunday, because Sunday is the 15th anniversary of Ben 10, and I was invited by Kuro the artist of the Ink Tank to participate in a Ben 10 YouTube 15th anniversary event, where a bunch of channels that do lots of Ben 10 content are putting out videos at different times during the day on Sunday, and then jumping over onto a live stream on the Ink Tank channel to talk about the videos we put out in Ben 10 and whatever else. I'm super excited to be a part of that, so be warned, next week's video, instead of Monday, Sunday. Anyway, this was a blast. Would definitely like to do another round of these Monster Hunter armor kind of designs, or just armors in general. Want to do some more medieval armor kind of stuff. And I really, really wanted to do Red Eyes Black Dragon for this episode as well, because that was my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh monster. But as I said, I just didn't have time in this episode. So if we do a round 2 of this, definitely going to be the first one that I draw. But anyway, everybody, that's all for today. I'm Christian Pearson. This has been PopCross Studios, home of the nerdiest art videos on YouTube. Next video will be coming out on Christmas, on Friday, and it's a pretty special Christmas episode. Not focused on Christmas itself, but it's well, I don't really want to give anything away. You'll see it on Friday. Anyway, goodbye, everyone.